Hey there, it's Jordan. Delighted to be joined by Dr. Jill Stein, running for the Green Party in the 2024 presidential election. And obviously, it's been an earthquake between assassination attempts and now Biden dropping out, the coronation of Vice President Harris in less than 24 hours, might I add. And of course, the ongoing genocide, which has fallen to the back pages, predictably. I wanted to first ask you, I mean, I think a big reason you've been a Green Party member and activist for many years is because you don't think you could get democracy within any of the major political parties. What's your reaction to the party that's been railing about democracy? I mean, it's been canceled. They could say there's going to be an open convention, but I haven't seen anything like this within the last 24 hours. I mean, major politicians, groups like Emily's List, all the potential candidates that would have challenged Harris have all gotten in line. Mm-hmm. Seems like that was kind of orchestrated before Biden's announcement.
It sure looks that way. I mean, it looks like the anti-democratic party is doubling down on its anti-democratic practices. And that got them into trouble, protecting a candidate who is not competent to be president now even, let alone to run for president for the next 4 years. Is a guy who's not too sure where he is and how to string a couple of sentences together. This is a very impaired candidate, and they have been kind of trying to hide him and in denial and making their own very internal power circle decision about anointing him, prohibiting debates, canceling some primaries, pressuring candidates not to run, basically removing RFK from the Democratic Party as part of that Joe Biden protection program, throwing many of us off the ballot, and having hired their army of lawyers to suppress competition, knowing that they have a candidate who cannot defend himself. And truth to tell, they're still going to have a candidate who can't defend herself. And the Democratic Party excels in suppressing debate and competition because they're very vulnerable. This is why they have to target and blame and shame third parties to, justify their own failures. So here you have them getting into this corner with Biden, who ultimately cannot be kept secret. The dysfunctional grandfather comes into full view. There was no way that wasn't going to happen. And now they're in real trouble trying to replace him without any democracy in the process whatsoever. And they're handling it in their usual mode of circling the wagons, having the internal discussion, and the political elites calling the shots and anointing Kamala Harris, who herself is a horribly flawed candidate, a candidate who could not even stay in the presidential race. She did so poorly in her own state, was way down on the list of candidates in terms of, the result in that primary. I think she dropped out before the primary because it was going to be so humiliating to her. So this is someone who does not present herself well, is not a communicator, to say the least, to put it charitably. And this is how they're going to beat back Donald Trump and fascism. Kamala Harris, who herself is a, favorite of AIPAC, has accepted more than $5 million over her career, who has a very troubled history as a cop, basically, as a prosecutor, a public prosecutor who has refused to allow a probably innocent inmate on death row to have potentially exonerating DNA evidence done, who giggled about putting parents of truants into jail, and laughed about it, who refused to support a policy that would require an independent investigation at a higher level of police shootings. So Kamala Harris is really a symbol of the abuses of the ruling elites. This is not how the Democrats, win an election or even run a small d democratic process. So they're just digging themselves in here deeper. They've created a little bit of a distraction and opportunity for further denial. Another $60 million has flowed in the last 24 hours. Again,
now up to 80.
Is that so?
Yep.
Yeah, that will save them.
And by all reports, Wall Street is popping champagne at Harris's nomination.
Well, she certainly supported everything Joe Biden did, and his major promise to Wall Street was that nothing would change. So, I think Wall Street is getting that promise again, effectively.
I think the media plays a large role here. They all kind of feign shock and ignorance after Biden's debate performance, and we didn't know. Anecdotally, as far back as 2020, I was overhearing top journalists at hotel bars just mocking Biden and debating whether it was Alzheimer's or dementia, during nightcaps at bars. But I find it kind of alarming. This wasn't new. I mean, you could see signs that Biden was cognitively declining, if you want to say, as far back as 2019 and 2020, but it was presented to us as gaffes or a stutter. I mean, you were a doctor for a long time. His stutter didn't seem to affect him as a senator or as vice president. He spoke just fine. What about the media's role here? Because I personally think that this was a cover-up for many years. Essentially, how it started, not to stop Trump in 2020, but to stop a potentially progressive president, and at that point, Bernie Sanders.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the mainstream media is implicated in all of this, not only the cover-up of Joe Biden's impairment, his apparently progressive incapacity, but everything else as well, covering up the genocide in Gaza, basically covering up the utterly abysmal condition of the American people, where half of all Americans basically are paying 30 to 50% of their income, struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Homelessness is skyrocketing. The climate is going completely off the charts, also being ignored here in the face of these very dramatic developments in our faces, and the climate was really overshadowed by the genocide, and the genocide is now thoroughly overshadowed by the hoopla, and the crisis really of the American political system, which is on full display right now. And the Democrats are part of it, and the Republicans, are part of it too. We have this very toxic political system that has many ways of failing. And this is another one that we're seeing right before our eyes, that we get these incredibly incompetent candidates. What does it say about the Democratic Party that it could do no better than Joe Biden in the last election and now this one, or Kamala Harris, and that there is no stable of candidates? I mean, even if the other candidates were willing to run, which they're not, the Gretchen Whitmers, for example, or the California governor, how are they different either? They're all APAC creatures. They don't have fundamentally different policies in any way. They're all creatures of the military industrial complex, Wall Street, and the war machine. That's what our political system is. And it is, it is doubling back now to just devastate the American people. And where are the American people in all this? The condition of the American people is being entirely overshadowed by the drama and hysteria surrounding the candidates. Trump's attempted assassination, the RNC, which was all about concocting a false threat to the American people, pretending that migrants are somehow, the problem. Migrants are not the problem. They actually make this a less dangerous country. They actually represent $7 trillion worth of economic development, were they actually processed properly and allowed to get jobs and do the work that they should be doing. A migrant problem, which we are creating through our regime change operations and our endless wars and climate catastrophe and the drug wars, which, all of which create the violence and the instability, which is driving the migrant crisis, much of which we can stop simply by changing policy. Even on day one, our administration would begin to treat substance use as a public health problem, not a criminal problem. And the minute you do that, you pull the rug out from under the power of drug cartels to cause, violence and instability, particularly south of the border. So, the Republicans are basically inventing a crisis and scapegoating and, just fear-mongering and finger pointing at migrants who are not the problem. They are the victim of a problem, which is, sort of U.S. policy that is driving migration, and then are incredibly ill-informed and malevolent policies, which the Democrats are now adopting from the Republicans and have been doing so for quite some time, creating the problem of migrants in this country, migrants who should be approved and who should be screened at the border and then allowed to go to work, because then they more than pay for their way. And, the Republicans are busy trying to create this false problem that migrants are bringing fentanyl. No, they're not. It's white Americans who are bringing fentanyl, over 90% of it, and it's coming through the legitimate, border crossings, not, it's not carried by migrants or refugees. So, the Republicans are just creating, a show of their own, and then Trump is a victim of the very violent system of which he's a part, and just because you're the ruling elite doesn't protect you from the violence of the system that you are participating in. And you cannot wreak havoc all around the world and think that it is not going to impact us here. Not that the shooter was a victim. I don't know that he was even a member of the military. I don't think so. But that is a major driver of, gun violence, military. But just to have people who need mental health services, who need communities to be plugged into, we don't have that in this country because we're very busy spending our congressional budget, over half of it, on the endless war machine, which endangers us all around the world from the violence, and which impoverishes us here at home and leaves very troubled people like the shooter, without services, without a place to get them plugged in, and allows the gun industry to just run wild and for guns to wind up in anybody's hands. So, yeah, we've seen all kinds of drama these last 2 to 3 weeks, which again are a symptom of a absolutely failing political system, which is dragging us all down with it, which is why we are fighting as the only anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker, climate emergency choice already on the ballot for a majority of American voters. We're fighting to be on the ballot in every state, because then it's harder for the media to sideline us and silence the voice of opposition here. And we're kind of it for opposing genocide as a major force in this race. Genocide, the war machine, crushing inequality, the failing economy, you name it. We have a disaster in front of our eyes rolling out in virtually every dimension of our lives, but it's a fixable disaster. So, the core here is this unbelievably violent and dysfunctional political system, which we are fundamentally challenging. And I want to encourage people, go to jillstein2024.com and support this fight. Help us get on the ballot in your state, or, volunteer or make a contribution to ensure that the American people will have a choice, and that we will force the real crises of our lives into focus here in this election, because otherwise they are not going to have a word in edgewise.
I will get to ballot access, but I wanted to ask one more question on the media. I think I know the answer, but it's worth asking. It was very telling to me that during the last 3 weeks of nonstop 24/7 coverage, will he or won't he drop out, there was no coverage of the fact that there were other candidates that worried Democrats could consider. You, Cornel West, RFK Jr., that wasn't even a concept. I assume your campaign had reached out to media outlets to get on, not just within the last 3 weeks, but in general. But did anybody contact you from CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, Associated Press, any of the big boys and gals during this Biden meltdown post-debate? Because if everyone was so freaked out, there were other candidates, whether they're your preferred candidates or not. There were other candidates that can complete sentences and make an argument.
Surprisingly, I mean, almost none. I think there was outreach, if I'm not mistaken, it was from Politico, of all things, after the debates, saying, what's going on in your campaign, now that people are really hungry for other options. There aren't very many who will say that. We're going on News Nation today. They've covered us a few times, but that's about it. I was on CNN once after being assaulted by the police at Washington University in St. Louis for being a part of a genocide protest, and I was assaulted, with a bicycle as a battering ram, and we got onto CNN, had a great conversation, and was actually able to talk about, my perspective as a Jew on Zionism and what I've learned about Zionism over the years, and how everybody deserves to understand the actual history, which did not become available until like the 1990s. And, most people haven't heard that Zionism actually has ethnic cleansing baked into its DNA from the very get-go. It has been a very violent movement driving people out. And October 7th didn't happen out of nowhere. That was part of this, just devastating circumstances that were really created when the Zionists came and broke up the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims who were living in peace together at that time. This is not an issue of anti-Semitism to talk about this. This is a matter of Zionism and getting the record straight about Zionism and how to fix it and all that. So anyhow, had a really good conversation with the anchor on CNN, and luckily she didn't lose her job. But I always worry when these actual conversations happen. Oh, because over the span of my political career, I've seen a lot of press get fired after covering me.
Really?
Yeah, especially print journalism, and that kind of screeched to a halt. After that.
That's pretty scandalous that they were fired just for covering you.
Well, it's always hard to say why they were fired. It's not like they announced, but there were, this was like an odd coincidence that one guy here who was working for a branch of, I think it was the Boston Globe, got transferred after doing a couple articles on my campaign for state rep at the time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like the one newspaper that was actually covering us got shot down.
Yeah. And let me ask you, ballot access wise, because it's not like, they could say there's going to be an open convention, but clearly it's going to be Kamala Harris. It's not like all the independents that were fleeing Biden to Trump are automatically, gravitating to Kamala Harris. It's not like all the young people fleeing the Democrats over this genocide, which is ongoing, and Israel just bombed another hospital recently. How many ballots are you officially on now, and how many are you unfortunately fighting the army of lawyers the Democratic Party is throwing at you?
So it's both. It's army of lawyers. It's also they have done job postings now for infiltrators and spies to infiltrate, report specifically about ballot access, and other things that are not defined in the job posting. So, they are managing some numbers of people who are infiltrating, spying, and no doubt, attempting to mess these things up because they're very easy to mess up.
So it's Pete Buttigieg's former communications director who's in charge of the DNC's.
Mark Elias?
Liz Smith.
Okay.
Liz Smith, who's in charge of his the DNC's, whatever you want to call it, division on third parties to try and neutralize.
And the lawyer on the case is Mark Elias, who's been the chief of dirty tricks and corruption, in my view, fraud that's been practiced against third parties. They simultaneously orchestrated like 20 lawsuits against Ralph Nader in, I think it was the 2004 or 2006 election, in order to tie his hands and deplete his resources. And in 2022, what they did to Matt Ho is famous because it was caught on tape, where Mark Elias's troop of dirty tricksters impersonated the Greens. How is that not election fraud? They impersonated Greens and called people who had signed the petition for Matt Ho, a wonderful anti-war hero, actually, who was running for Senate in North Carolina. They called his petition signers and fraudulently represented themselves as members of the Green Party and asked the Greens to take, they said, we're the Greens and we want you to take your signature off our petition. We've decided whatever. I don't know what reason they gave. It was pretty preposterous. But they happened to call the chair of the party, the chair of the North Carolina Green Party, who recorded the conversation and presented it in court. And they were found guilty and fined for so-called operating with dirty hands, so-called. Dirty hands is, puts it mildly. I don't know how that isn't fraud, election fraud, for which they ought to be in jail, in my view. But this is what they do regularly. And, this advertising for spies and infiltrators is more of the same. And then the third tactic now is that they're holding up our matching funds. We're owed $270,000 in public matching funds. And they're the Department of Treasury, which is a political appointment, at the very last minute held that funding, which should have been provided to us a couple of weeks ago. We need it like immediately to pay for past ballot access work and upcoming campaigns. They're trying to strangle us. So I really want to encourage people, make a contribution at jillstein2024.com if you want to have, democracy in this election, because otherwise the Democratic Party is basically throwing opposition, throwing, the only anti-genocide campaign that is on the ballot for a majority of voters. They're doing their best to try to keep us off the ballot. So, yeah, this is what the Democrats are doing. It's absolutely outrageous and, should be cause for just totally voting the bums out, throwing the bums out there. They are not the Democratic Party. They are the anti-Democratic Party. And
how many ballots are you on now? And how many ballots are they challenging? Roughly, if you know.
Yes. So right now we're on the ballot in, I think it's 24 states. And they are challenging currently Nevada. But many of the ballot lines we have from before petitions. We had them as holdovers from the prior election. If you meet certain criteria in the prior election, you maintain your ballot status. So many of these are not subject to challenge, but it's the new ones that we're getting now that they're challenging. And they kept us off in New York by changing the rules. That was done actually 2 years ago, we took it to court at the time, knowing that there's no way a grassroots campaign could do what the new rules require, which is that you have to come up with 45,000 valid signatures in 6 weeks. You can't do that unless you have the money of a super PAC, or the money of an RFK. You have to have deep pockets to do this. You have to have big billionaire donors, which he has. He has very big funding, and so he could spend $1 million in New York alone. We don't have anywhere near that money. We're a people-powered campaign. So we took those rules to court, which were basically instigated by Cuomo in a secret provision in an emergency COVID budget. It's just absolutely, this whole thing just reeks of a war on democracy from the get-go, the way that it was done and its consequences. And we took it to court saying that this will eliminate all candidates that don't have billionaire sponsors. And in fact, that's what happened with this 45,000 signature requirement in 6 weeks. 3 people will be on the ballot. RFK is the only independent candidate that could afford to buy his way in. Biden and Trump will be on the ballot. It will be the 3, billionaire sponsored campaigns that will be on the ballot, and that's it. So that we're fighting. We're actually fighting that with RFK because he's expecting to be thrown off the ballot too. So we're actually working together on that one. And we're expecting that the Democrats are going to pull the same, because, they're doing this in Georgia now. They're throwing PSL off the ballot. I don't know who else, but they're basically finding trivia with which to tie us up in court. And it doesn't even matter whether they succeed. All they have to do is file the case and make it, deplete our resources to be able to run more ballot drives. So they can succeed even without winning the case. They can tie us up. And this is, in my view, this is authoritarianism. This is fascism when you prevent, this is as bad as Trump undermining the transfer of power after the election. This is about preventing any reasonable election process from the get-go. This is not like more innocent than what Trump has done at the other end. This is all devastating. This is all about the rise of authoritarianism and fascism here. So we think it's really important for us to stand up and fight this now, and go to JillStein2024.com and join that fight, because this is about our future, whether we're going to have a fighting chance in the remnants of democracy.
And obviously, whatever happens, it's not, I'm not going to ask about that, but obviously it's uphill climb for you, Cornel West, as lefties to begin with, against this undemocratic machine. At this point, Kamala Harris is weak. Would you call for him, since he's at this point on less ballots as you, to drop out and join forces with you, so the left doesn't kind of cannibalize each other in terms of people who might support both of you on policy, but can only vote for one?
I think that's a question that us progressives need to ask ourselves.
Well, I'm asking you, do you think he should drop out?
In my view, I think we all need to take a lesson from France. How did France just beat back right-wing fascism in France? They did it by collaborating. And, it wasn't only the left. They also collaborated with the centrist, what's his name, Macron, with his party. They all collaborated, and they agreed that whichever party was the strongest in that district, that they would consolidate behind them. Why are we not doing that? To my mind, and we've always advocated for that. This isn't about self-promotion. This is about promoting a fighting chance for progressives here. And to my mind, it's very misguided not to follow a collaborative strategy right now. I think we're in a very serious condition. And I don't think this election is just a practice run. You know, in my view, Dr. West's campaign, PSL, and our campaign, which are really the three progressive campaigns, should be working in solidarity here for the sake of, you know, it's been called a unified front against fascism. And there's a member, a former member of the Panthers, Deruba, I forget his last name, but he's a very prominent voice in the African-American community now who is calling for a unified, or rather a united front against fascism. But he's saying, you know, he's kind of taking a very diplomatic position here and saying, well, let's do that after the election. And I'm saying, no, we need to do that now. We need to do this now and prevent, you know, it's not just prevent a disaster, because in my view, we've got a disaster on both sides, whether it's Kamala Harris, the genocider, the, you know, the cop protector, you know, the censorship advocate, the assault on our civil liberties, everything, you know, whether it's Kamala Harris leading the charge here or Donald Trump. In my view, it's not much different. I see this very much as Malcolm X described it, you know, with the wolf, at least, no, I'm sorry, the wolf, it can be hard to read. No, I have it backwards. It's the wolf, which looks dangerous, but it's the fox who pretends to be your friend that is the most dangerous of all. So, you know, that being like Democrats who give lip service to a progressive agenda, but don't actually follow that. And you could take issue by issue. Their track record is every bit as dangerous, you know, and they are leading the charge actually on genocide and the assault on our civil liberties and our freedom of speech and our right to protest. And that is absolutely foundational to our democracy. Democrats are also leading the charge and throwing people off the ballot and, you know, basically taking a fascist approach to our elections before they happen, as opposed to after them, which is, you know, where Trump has focused. This is a disaster either way. I think the only hope is to stand up and fight this, remembering that this is a three-way race among genociders. You have RFK, Trump, and Biden, who are all leading the charge on genocide, all for standing with Israel to the last Palestinian. And, you know, that is absolutely dangerous. There is no lesser evil here. We have two greater evil choices, or rather three, three greater evil choices between RFK, Trump, and Biden. And when you have a three-way split among the pro-war vote, well, that's a three-way split among the pro-war vote. And if you have only one campaign that's on the ballot for a majority of voters, which is anti-genocide, anti-war, pro-worker, climate emergency, and the only such campaign, you know, a race which is divided four ways can be won with as little as 26% of the popular vote. There was a poll that just came out today that showed us at 4% nationally. So this is not impossible, actually. And what did it have us? I think 7 or 8% under age 30. So, you know.
So one more time, though, just because I don't want people to say she's dodging, in plain English, if you had a conversation with him, do you think he should drop out so that the third party left could be unified and you are on more ballots objectively?
So let me say, I don't believe in telling people they can't run. So I would not say that. Okay. What I would say is, would you please think strategically here and take a look at France and how we actually beat back the fascist threat? I think it's really important to look at that. I would love personally to hold a conference and have progressives come together, and not just the candidates, but other progressives as well. And let's brainstorm strategy. Let's brainstorm genocide. There are 1 million people according to the World Food Program. Up to 1 million people who are going to die in the next month from this genocide. Do we just want to have a symbolic campaign, or do we really want to ratchet up the pressure on empire? Because you don't have to win the race in order to win the issue. Simply by being a strong, unified campaign, being on the ballot, none of us can afford to either get on the ballot or to defend ourselves against the limitless deep pockets of the Democrats to come after us legally and throw us off the ballot. So our only hope for 1 million people who are under attack right now, who've been tortured for 9 months, have been absolutely living hell. The only hope for them is for us to assert maximum pressure in this election. And I think every candidate who says that they want to stop genocide needs to think strategically about how we actually do that. If we have a voice which is on the ballot across the country, then we cannot be locked out by the media. But if we're not on the ballot across the country, they will lock us out. We will not have a word in edgewise in this election. It will proceed as though everything is fine in Israel and in Gaza. It will not get the time of day. So I think it's really important for people to put aside their personal ambitions and to really take a good hard look. I think this is hard for any candidate to do, which is why this shouldn't just be among candidates. In my view, this should be about the progressive community coming together and, and holding a public discussion about this, about what is strategic for us to do as progressives. We are all in the target hairs right now. As Gaza goes, we all go. This is about murdering children and torturing children with impunity. It's about the future of international law and human rights. So on that basis, this is about us all. It's about us all, in terms of what happens, to working people and the future of working people who are struggling to survive right now. It's about 8 million people a year who go into poverty from just trying to pay their healthcare costs. They're actually moved into poverty. It's about 1 out of every 4 cancer patients who loses their home and their savings because they have cancer and they get hit with outrageous costs. 40% of all cancer patients, more than 40% of all cancer patients, have depleted their life savings within 2 years. This is the kind of crisis we're facing. And by the way, cancer rates are rising in young people now dramatically, thanks to, it's thought, probably food system issues, because we're feeding people crap and we're making healthy food absolutely unaffordable. So we're all going down with the ship here. Some people faster than others, but we have an absolutely disastrous trajectory that we are on right now. We're all going the way of Gaza here, one way or another. We're also heading towards nuclear war now rather quickly around Ukraine. There's an incredible escalation that's going on. This is completely off of public view right now because, Gaza has really drawn attention for obvious human reasons. But the escalation of the nuclear crisis in 3 spots around the world, but especially around Ukraine, is absolutely devastating right now and should be front and center. But it will not be discussed at all. We need to be in the business of abolishing nuclear weapons right now, but that's not on the table, and they won't acknowledge that in the least. So at any rate, we have no choice except to stand up and fight for an America and a world that works for all of us. And we've got to fight like our lives depend on it. And we need to be in the conversation. That is, we need to have a true progressive voice in this conversation to be able to point that out. And we're going to have to find a way to build solidarity together if we're going to overcome this fascist, endless war machine that is winning the day right now.
Right. And my last question, you've been mentioning the ongoing genocide, rightly so. Just from a human perspective, what does it say to you? How do you react when, I mean, it's adoring, tributes to Joe Biden in the last 24 hours? What a great man, a great president. I mean, it's not just that he supported and is supporting this genocide. I mean, so many other damaging policies that have been dressed up as historic. I think of, I mean, he did one good thing, which was the child tax credit, and then wouldn't fight to extend it. He let President Manchin bury it. He abandoned a $15 minimum wage which at this point is the conservative position. Abandoned a public option. Campaigned on ending drilling on public land. Doubled that. Not to mention, we have a climate inferno, and he did a speech calling for cooling centers.
And the Inflation Reduction Act, which he pats himself on the back for, is actually a fossil fuels first bill. It requires that it's an outrage. It's 2 million acres onshore have to be auctioned off every year. 2 million acres. He who was not going to allow any auctioning off of public lands for destructive extraction. 2 million acres onshore, and I believe it's 60 million acres offshore have to be auctioned off every year for the next 10 years, according to the Inflation Reduction Act, before any renewables projects can be built. This is the climate president who has massively expanded the production of fossil fuels in this country, and also oversaw, or at least approved, the blow up of the Nord Stream pipeline, which then led to the building of 22 new liquid natural gas plants here in this country, which are the equivalent of some 500 new coal plants. That's to his credit. Not all of it, but most of it is to his credit. So yeah, I mean, how does it feel to see him getting accolades? This is what you get from a political system that is rotten to the core, that is basically run of, by, and for oligarchs. We live in a world of empire, oligarchy, and genocide, and climate collapse. This is what the future looks like, and it is getting worse by the hour. It's not getting better under both parties. And we do not have a survivable future with just these two parties. We actually need a politics of integrity, a politics that is not bought and paid for by billionaires and bankers and war profiteers. This is what we are about. And, to pretend that Joe Biden is anything but, the face of the war machine is pathetic and disgusting. And this is the kind of propaganda that the system will produce. It's very important not to take that propaganda at face value, to hear what your options are, and to actually stand up and vote with the courage of your convictions. And us as candidates need to operate strategically here and to actually take our moral responsibility seriously, and to pretend that this is just a rehearsal, or this is just a token campaign or a symbolic campaign, is just a moral outrage. We can't do that. What we do right now really matters. It really matters in Gaza right now, because to get on the ballot across the country is to really put is to put the resistance, the opposition on the map. And as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. We have the power to make that demand. We've got to make that demand in every way that we can. If we get lucky, we'll get 26% of a four-way split, and we'll turn the White House into a greenhouse, and we'll profoundly change the future of the planet on day one, when we can stop genocide, when we can launch antitrust suits against the corporate media and begin to break it up so that we actually have media that's reflecting, a diversity of opinions, and not just, corporate America. We can declare the climate emergency and unleash over $500 billion every year, starting on day one of our administration. And we can begin to shut down fossil fuels on an emergency basis. and get rid of them in the next decade. But we need to create conservation and renewables, and we need to be doing the right thing across multiple sectors of transportation, housing, energy production, and so on, agriculture in particular. So, we have a plan. We know how to do it. It would start on day one, and we have to stand up and fight for it. And I really encourage everybody who's listening to take our future into our hands. This latest failure of the political system, that is the failure of Joe Biden and attempting to foist him on the American people, this decision that was made by the Democratic ruling elites, that kind of fantasy thinking, which is now being extended into Kamala Harris and anointing her. This needs to be viewed as an opening, as an opportunity. This is another message from the failing political system that it's going down rather quickly right now, and we need to build the lifeboat rather quickly. And we have to stand up. Nobody's going to do it for us. We've got to do it. We have an incredible opening right now, as people are reminded how badly the system is failing. We have to stand up and move in the direction that we need to go. So go to JillStein2024.com and join the revolution, because the clock is ticking, and we have to stand up for an America and a world that works for all of us. This is within our reach if we stand up and demand it. And thanks to you, Jordan, for having the courage to actually speak out on so many of these issues. And I would add East Palestine, or rather East Palestine, I guess it's pronounced, to these issues that are just catastrophes in and of themselves. And absolutely. Thanks for all your great coverage on that, and Flint and all the rest.
I can't let you go because this just broke. With the benefit that you don't know anything about it, I'll just read it. RFK Jr., who obviously is polling highest among independent candidates right now, so obviously you'd want to speak to his voters. He sought a job in the Trump White House as he weighed endorsing Trump. So apparently, according to the Washington Post, their discussions between Donald Trump and RFK Jr. started a day after Trump's assassination attempt. And RFK was seeking an administration job overseeing health and medical issues. And Trump's campaign turned him down. So that's according to 4 people familiar with the matter. So basically, RFK, was pitching a posting. I don't know what specific position, but something over health in exchange for an endorsement. Your thoughts?
I'm not surprised. There was a phone conversation that was leaked, that was posted actually by RFK's son, that was really bizarre. And RFK's campaign tried to kind of fuzzy it up, saying that, RFK was going to be talking to everybody because he believes in talking to everybody. I don't. And
just so people know, Trump was saying some cockamamie stuff on childhood vaccines, and RFK was just responding kind of, yep. So yeah, that's what
and yes, I mean the content aside, it was just the whole context was really bizarre. Why was RFK having a private conversation with Donald Trump? And the explanation just did not ring true whatsoever. And he's a very, I know a lot of people who were a part of his campaign, including Dennis Kucinich, and they have their NDA agreements, their non-disclosure agreements and stuff like that. But even policy advisors and people who've known him for a long time, he does not come out like a squeaky clean guy and the model of integrity. And there are just so many contradictions between what he says and what he does. He says that he's all about reforming the system. Well, how's he doing that? By, running billionaire-powered super PACs and this latest arrangement with the libertarians, which is so bizarre. They're doing some kind of victory funds together. And they put out a tweet, like Libertarians for Trump put out a tweet celebrating that, oh, isn't this great? Now the non-uniparties, that is, if you're not Democrat or Republican, then like you're some inherent good. I don't think so. It was celebrating that now uniparties have equal access to billionaire money through these victory funds, thanks to the libertarians. Billionaires now have equal access to, bribery and insider influence in the non-uniparties. Well, isn't that great? So what makes the non-uniparties different from the uniparty? How then is RFK's campaign cleaner and more having more integrity than the system that he critiques as so corrupt? I mean, to my mind, if you're talking the talk, you have to walk the walk. And if you're doing one, not the other, that just raises all kinds of questions. And then not to mention that he claims to be a peace candidate, but he supports the Israeli genocidal war and all of their talking points against Gaza. I mean, to me, that's just a jaw dropper, and he's selling himself as a peace candidate. So I'm sorry, but I'm all for challenging the uniparty, but not with same old in a new wrapper. So I don't find this news surprising in the least. It just explains it.
Seems like he was offering a quid pro quo with the guy calling for mass deportations. So, yeah.
Oh, Marian Adelson, right? Was that Marian Adelson? Because supposedly
it seems like RFK was offering a quid pro quo to Trump. Give me a post and I'll endorse you. Give me a top health job, which God forbid, and I will, endorse you. That's what the Washington Post is reporting. And
wow,
that seems like one hell of a compartmentalization. We could talk about the Democrats, which we have, but if you saw the RNC, that was an ugly scene too, with mass deportation signs and
terrible. Yes, yeah. and just creating a fake problem, a problem that doesn't exist, right. Demonizing immigrants like they're the problem. No, they're the victim. They are the victim of the U.S. drivers of migration, but then the victim of a very malevolent migration system. Migrants are a resource. They are $7 trillion worth of economic development in the next 10 years. That's what migrants represent. They also represent a much safer population. They dilute out the violence of the American population. So this is all made up stuff here. This is just demonizing because the Republicans have nothing to offer. They have to run on fear. It's like in the same way Democrats don't really have anything to offer either. They just run on fear, but it's fear of Trump. So it's like it's all this like fantasy world that's all based on fear. We need to stand up. RFK has never, to me, it was always a question of when he was going to blow his cover, because he appears to be such an opportunist, and what he does is not what he says. And he's been leading a lot of very frustrated people around by the nose, pretending that he was going to provide the integrity that they seek. And, I think this is the chickens coming home to roost here, that the whistle got blown on him, and we'll see where that goes. But we still have our campaign is a politics of integrity that's of, by, and for the people. That is what the dissidents are looking for here. Those who have thrown out this very corrupt political system need a politics that's working for us, and that can actually deliver an America that works for all of us and a world that works for all of us. And, I'd say welcome, abandon Biden, we'll need a new term for that, dump Trump, and join Jill. We're going to, take this election by storm. If we can get on the ballot, we are going to force our way into this debate. And this is a time for transformation. It's absolutely unstoppable if we're working together to make this happen.
Thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And we will be in touch.
Looking forward to it. Great talking with you. Thanks, Jordan.